Good morning. It's Saturday. I'm in the office. You know what that means. The Saturday Morning Hustle podcast. And today I'm talking to you about imposter syndrome, but not the typical imposter syndrome you think of. This is a very different subset of imposter syndrome. So for those of you who don't know, imposter syndrome is when people feel like when they're having success, when they're put in charge, or they're in a leadership role, etc., they feel like they haven't earned it, or they're not actually capable of pulling off what people are expecting from them. Thus, they feel like an imposter, and that's imposter syndrome. It's called a syndrome because it's something you self-inflict upon yourself. It's not necessarily something that the rest of the world is saying you're not ready, you're not good enough, but you're doing it to yourself. For me, I've never actually had imposter syndrome in that way. In fact, I've probably been the exact opposite. I've probably been too overconfident and too willing to take on leadership roles and responsibility before I was ready. So I've never had a imposter syndrome when it comes to gaining responsibility or being put in charge of something and then not feeling like I wasn't ready. It was probably the exact opposite. But where I do find, I realized this week that I have an imposter syndrome in that when I have to actually get completely fully dressed up in suit and tie, which is something I never really grew up around, it still makes me feel a little bit like I'm playing dress up. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome happening there. So here's the background. I am currently the chairman of the Oklahoma Venture Forum, which is a professional group of entrepreneurs, service providers, investors, etc., that have a monthly meeting where there's some education, some networking, etc., all working to create business opportunities in Oklahoma. So as the chairman, I lead the meetings, and it is all business professionals. So I wear the full suit and tie, wear my nice glasses, pull my hair back, the nice shoes, the whole nine every month. And when I come into my office, and the office where I work, which is the office and co-working, and it's a lot more of an entrepreneurial space, and it's definitely a lot more of a jeans and t-shirt type of place. And a lot of times when I'm just in the office, I'm not meeting with clients, and I'm just working in the office, I'm in jeans and t-shirt too. I'm a dress down when I can kind of person. And and like I say, I pull my hair back, I've got long hair, I got the tattoos, I got all this other stuff that is more of the creative side, a creative aspect of what I do. But I have my professional moments when I have meetings, etc. And even when I have meetings with clients and prospective clients and a lot of networking, it's more of a jeans and sports coat is really kind of my uniform, if you will. I understand getting dressed up, but I don't necessarily ever feel super comfortable in a full suit and tie and the whole ensemble, although I do it on occasion because my responsibilities call for it. But when I do, I have a little bit of imposter syndrome. I feel like I'm sort of playing dress up because, like I said earlier, I didn't grow up around people that wore suit and tie on the regular. Both my parents were very working class, and so they never wore suit to work. It was more of a work uniform going to work. I was around even going to church with my grandparents. My grandparents on my mother's side were very, very religious and very much into church every week. And we went with them a lot as kids and as a teenager. And my grandfather, who is one of my greatest role models in life. My father and my grandfather are my greatest role models in life. My grandfather would wear a suit, and I didn't really realize it as a kid, but now as an adult, I kind of think about it. I think he had one, maybe two suits. I think he alternated between the two. He still never really wore a tie. And my grandfather he preferred to be a little bit more on the silly side than on the serious side on a regular basis, even though he was a serious man, ran a lot of businesses, had a lot of success, had an amazing professional life and personal life. He wore suits to church. Both my grandparents always dressed up for church. They took church very serious, but it wasn't a suit and tie, and it definitely wasn't a business suit and tie. I think it was more light colors, and he almost looked out of place in a suit and tie, or suit, no tie, because I was used to seeing him in boots and jeans and a work shirt, because he worked on the farm, and he had oil rigs and all kinds of things like that. They're, again, a lot more of a blue-collar approach. So I didn't grow up seeing someone put a suit and tie on and take the briefcase and go to work like Wally and the Beaver did back in Leave It to Beaver. That wasn't my experience growing up. And so now when I do it, in fact, before my dad had one black jacket that I think he wore to every wedding and every funeral he ever went to. I don't think he ever owned a full suit, and I don't think he ever owned a tie. And because I can remember when we would go to things that were more formal, like a wedding or something like that, or a funeral, he didn't necessarily wear a tie. So I grew up understanding that people in the world wore suit and tie. I knew that. I saw that on TV. I saw that in other people around, but it wasn't something that was my experience. And so, you have prom when you're in high school and you rent a tux, and that feels all goofy and silly. And even though you wear it, it doesn't feel natural or normal. You go to formal events, black ties, even putting a tuxedo on for a black tie still feels very dress up. It's almost part of the fun for most people of going to black tie type events is the level of dress up. And you get to kind of almost be someone else as you go to a nonprofit event or a gala or something like that if you're wearing black tie. But even then, it's very structured. You got to do this, got to do this, can't do this. In my own wedding, I wore a suit, but I wore a white jacket with black pants. Wasn't a sports coat, but it was a little bit of that combination. So I've never been one who's really formally dressed. And so now on occasion when I have to be formally dressed, I have a little bit of imposter syndrome because it just doesn't feel natural to me, even though I feel like I've earned the respect of the position and the authority to do so. And being the chairman of the Oklahoma Venture Forum I have no problem doing that, announcing that as myself as that person, playing that role, feeling that responsibility. I have no problem at all doing it, but literally putting on the suit and tie and to go walk into the meeting dressed that way, I do feel like I'm playing a little bit of dress up, a little bit of imposter syndrome, if you will. So the grand scheme of things, you could have imposter syndrome or not when it comes to your role at work, your career, your responsibility, the way you present yourself, the way you're trying to get your boss to be impressed with you so you get a promotion. So you put yourself out in an interview so that you can get the next job. If you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to do a startup and you're trying to wear 100 different hats because you're the entrepreneur, you're the webmaster, you're the accountant, you're the bookkeeper, you're the salesperson, you're answering the phone. You're all these things if you're an entrepreneur, if you're in a small business or a startup. And at some point, it could still feel like you're kind of playing a role, which is perfectly fine. It happens to a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So don't let imposter syndrome discourage you. And in fact, remember, it is a syndrome. It's something that is just in your own head. A lot of people go through it, maybe not exactly the way you're going through it or exactly the way it's sort of defined in the textbook definition of it. But if there are things that are trying to hold you back, if there are things in the back of your head that are telling you you're not good enough, you're not capable, you're not ready, you don't have to listen to those things. You can go forward anyways. And when I put on the suit and tie and I feel like I'm playing dress up, like I've said 100 times so far, I still do it. And I still go and I kind of sort of own the process. And I come out of it the other side with, that wasn't so bad and it's okay. And no one looked at me and said, what the hell's going on? And no one called me out as an imposter. Because it's an imposter syndrome, it's all in my head. That keeps me going to do the right thing, to do the next thing, to not use it as an excuse. Here's the key from all this rambling about imposter syndrome. Do not let imposter syndrome be the excuse for you to not do something. If you want to do something, if you need to do something, if it's a step in the process of you building the thing you want to build, it's a career, it's a business, it's a side hustle, whatever it is you're trying to do, if you need to put yourself out there as that thing, for people to look at you in that way, for people to accept you in a role, for people to say that guy, that girl can be that person that they're trying to be right now, there's no reason to not do it. Because when you get done with it, you're done with it. And at the end of the day, it's not very likely someone calls you out as an imposter. But it's more likely the imposter syndrome is all in your head. Hope that helps. We'll talk to you next week on the Saturday Morning Hustle. Have a great week. We'll see you next weekend. Be good to each other. Don't panic out there in the world. Everything's going to be fine. We'll see you next week on the Saturday Morning Hustle podcast. Have you ever thought about recording your own podcast? Because maybe you should. I bet you have something interesting to say. The best, fastest, and easiest way to record your podcast is the Anchor app. I use it exclusively for the Saturday Morning Hustle podcast, and I'm very happy about it. Lots of features. They're always updating it. They're always paying attention to people using it, and they're even helping you get paid. Consider using the Anchor app for your podcast.